Hi, everybody. I thought I would take some time to go over our first two Chekhov stories with you to just address some of the questions on the homework assignments and then to just address Chekhov in general. So let's start out with Foiled. So Foiled is one of his premier slice of life stories where we're sort of interjected into this world of a mom, a dad, their daughter, and the person they're sort of pursuing to have marry their daughter. We have to remember that this is 19th century Russia, where trying to procure a husband for your daughter is sort of one of the parental tasks. It seems kind of ridiculous nowadays, but that was sort of an important feature. I think we can think about what we read with A Thousand Splendid Suns, and as much as maybe we don't like Jaleel and we don't like Jaleel's actions, there is sort of and has been this mindset where daughters have been sort of married off, and that includes even in our Western culture. So so here we go. This is sort of a comedic little sketch. It kind of goes back to Chekhov's maybe reticence toward marriage as a general rule. We start out with this first question, which is about Chekhov's use of tag names. Most often, our translators are able to just find a suitable equivalent and just go from there. Although I will say as an aside that most translators have avoided Chekhov's comedic short stories because they're so sparse. There are so few words that they're hard to work with. Our translator here, Harvey Pitcher, sort of embraces this and writes a lot about sort of taking the challenge. So what tag names do we have? Well, to me, I noticed that dregs, meaning bottom of the barrel, is one, and then gropin, which sounds like he gropes, which is sort of what they're getting at in the short story, which is that he's sort of gross toward his students and toward women. He grabs them, he wants to kiss them, that sort of thing, right? Cleopatra you could play around with, but the sort of things that I think of when I think of Cleopatra is what she was beautiful, she was an adulteress, she was wily, and none of those three characteristics really show up in this story, but maybe he's supposed to intimate it that way. Who knows? Number two, Chekhov structures his story by presenting a situation, detailing conversation, and ending with the ironic twist. How does he set up the irony? So the seed for the irony is sort of right here. He tells us what the plan is. So he says that, now look, mother, as soon as they start talking about their feelings, whip down the icon from the wall, and in we go to bless them. Once we've put the icon over them, that's absolutely final and sacred. He can't wriggle out then, even if he goes to court. So he tells us what we need to know, that if Gropin is saying he loves Natashenka in front of an icon, that's sort of like swearing on a Bible, and it'll be sanctified and he'll have to marry her. So that's our seed, which of course then we get to the ironic twist later. Let's see if I can open this bigger. So we get to that ironic twist then over here at the end when he explains what had happened, which is that Cleopatra had grabbed, instead of a picture of Jesus, she grabs a picture of a historical writer, and it all kind of falls apart, and off Gropin runs to escape his, needing to marry her or whatever. That tragic fate, if you will. Okay, let's see here. So then how does he indicate that she's involved in the plot? If we go through her actions, you see that she's sort of playing this game as well, with things like she's checking herself in the mirror. Let's see if I can find it. The girl answered, this is right here, the girl answered giving a shrill, affected laugh, meaning like it's sort of a forced laugh, and glancing at herself in the mirror. So you get the sense of her like a vanity, that she's sort of toying with him. So she's sort of in on this, at least it seems. He eventually becomes a playwright, and here we see the conversation between two people. It's important to know this, like in the stories that we're reading, most of them follow the same formula: situation, conversation, ironic twist. So Gropin seems to be sort of a crappy teacher, if you will, right? Like right here, it says that, well, first, Nadashenka points out that he can't even do the task that he's set to teach, right? And then he explains that his point in teaching is not to teach handwriting, but just to keep the kids in line, right? So he says, bang them on the head with a ruler, make them kneel in the corner. What's handwriting anyway? So this subject matter itself, he's not passionate about, and he's only about like that authority and sort of physical violence. Not a good guy. Vices and follies. So this sort of is really open-ended for you. This is where you get to sort of try to dig into Chekhov a little bit. He's tricky because he just lays these situations out for you in this unbiased manner, and then you're supposed to sort of scratch away at the surface and decide what it is he's trying to get at. He doesn't pander to you the way that Hosseini did, where Hosseini told you exactly what to think throughout the narrative. Chekhov just sort of gives it to you and then hopes that you sort of make the right conclusions. So what can we think? Well, you certainly have the sort of the, if you will, folly, I guess, of parents of thinking that trickery is the way to procure a husband for their daughter. And this is just this sort of idea, I think parents still do this, where maybe they try to set up or if they're not setting up their kid, they're trying to tell their kid who they should or should not marry. They sort of get involved in that maybe to a degree that's not appropriate. You also have Gropin, who's willing to get away with whatever he possibly can, right? But you notice, right, when he gets caught, he's like, oh, I'm done for. Like, so he's willing to push that button. So what are the lengths that humans will go to, right? They will continue to push that, like step over that line as long as they don't get caught. You can look at the flirtatiousness of Nadashenka, where she also is toying with her own life and his life. And not sort of thinking through what the ramifications are. So sort of that frivolous attitude toward marriage, that it's not a serious thing maybe is, or that you can sort of trick someone into it and that's going to create a good relationship. That's where I would go. Now, of course, could you go somewhere else? Absolutely. You certainly can see some criticism of the education system in this, right? That people are put in a role of teaching students that aren't passionate about the subject, aren't even good at the subject, that sort of thing absolutely is in play as well. I hope that explains Foiled for you, and as you can see, there's probably a lot more that I could have talked about, but we'll move on to Vanka. Okay, so as we look at Vanka, the first task is to summarize the story in one sentence. I would say a 9-year-old boy, a miserable 9-year-old boy desperately writes a letter to his grandfather begging him to take him in, but the letter never makes it to the grandfather. Something to that effect, right? So the things that emphasize Vanka's sad situation, some words or phrases, I have no father, heaved a broken sigh, dark, let's see here, dark icon, crumpled sheet, rusty nib, he kneels, all of these sorts of things just on the first page alone sort of emphasize his dire situation. And it goes on throughout, but that's what I have on the page. But throughout the whole story, you keep getting he's heaving a sigh, he talks about the abuse, all of those things, okay? So he talks about his grandfather in this idealized view, right? So let's see here, what would I say? I would say maybe a face always crinkling with laughter is an expression that is idealized. Ample sheepskin coat is idealized. So there's two just right there. So Vanka imagines and idealizes his grandfather throughout, even when he's thinking about some of the things that his grandfather does that maybe isn't as perfect. It's sort of conveyed as if it's a positive. Grandfather would smoke a pipe, take a long pinch of snuff, and make fun of Vanka, who is shivering in the cold, is sort of plunked in the middle of this beautiful imagery of, the young fir trees garlanded with hoarfrost stood perfectly still. So you have this action that the grandfather is making fun of Vanka, but it's under this sort of beautiful night sky and this beautiful evening, and therefore the sort of negativity sort of diminishes. And there's a lot of correlation that Chekhov will tap into between landscape, nature, sort of think about your transcendentalists, right? So that nature has this value of eliminating the negativity almost, right? So I kind of jumped down to that poetic point. So then let's, the question that I got kind of again and again is like, what is less than ideal? So let's take a peek at this, right? So grandfather makes fun of Vanka. Grandfather pinches, we have up here that he's pinching the women in the butt or whatever. On the other page, there's a comment about he's drunk, So throughout it all, the reality of grandfather is that he sleeps in a kitchen, he works at night, he's impoverished, uneducated, he sort of abuses dogs, he would abuse Vanka, he abuses women, he drinks too much. It's all of these sorts of things that if you look at his actions, they're not really that perfect. But to Vanka at 9 years old on Christmas Eve, they're the best thing in the world. Anything is better than what he's living in, that sort of thing, right? So then we get to the end of the story and look at him. He's lulled by the sweetest hopes of being rescued by his grandfather and taken from this sort of nightmare of a life that he's living in. But that will never come true because look at the way he addressed this little letter to his grandfather on Christmas Eve night, right? To grandfather in the village. And then as an afterthought, he writes Konstantin Markovich, as if that's going to make it to his grandfather in whatever village, in whatever province, in whatever zip code, et cetera, et cetera. And so clearly this will never make it to his grandfather, but it gives him hope. And that's sort of one of these things that we get, right? So even though it's sad and we're supposed to sort of also chuckle at Vanka's misery, we also get the sense that like just even the slightest bit of hope is enough to get him through the next day. Or perhaps, just this idea of imagination that gets you through your misery, right, if you will. 19th century fiction, it was not known for even paying any attention to the underclass. You have very, very, very few authors that are paying attention to the underclass. You have Charles Dickens and you have Chekhov, and that's about it. Everybody else is looking at like upper class and sort of the idealized view. Eventually we get Mark Twain in there where he will give us sort of realism, but that's not till later. And so we get this snippet, and Chekhov really knows the underclass. Like he's lived it and he's aware of it. He goes back and lives with the underclass even when he's working as a doctor. And so this is sort of where we get this idea of Chekhov doing that. So then think about linking those themes and messages. Maybe it's that idea of hope. Maybe it's the idea of abuse, imbalance of power, any of those sorts of things that maybe you came up with A Thousand Splendid Suns. I hope this little blip helped you understand the stories a little bit more. Now that we're full distance, hopefully we can work through the stories together. Take care.